Hi, I'm here to share some tips and ideas that have to do with the fiber reactive dye soy wax paste that we came up with in my studio in 2016. It's on the market, it's available now. If you don't know anything about it, you're just about to find out all about it, and you can get it on my website. What we've got here is the MX fiber reactive dye in a paste consistency product that can be applied with brushes and is really perfect for stenciling. We did a short video that we thought covered all the bases and helped people to understand how to use the product, but then we played with it some more and figured out some additional tips. So this includes everything that you would have seen if you watched the previous video, but it's got some additional information that turns out to be pretty important. So let's talk about the fabric first. These fiber reactive dyes work on natural fiber, and natural fiber is any fiber that comes from the planet. So we have cellulose, which is plant fiber, and that would be cotton or rayon, for example, or linen, or hemp. And then we have the protein fiber, and that would be mainly silk and wool. And you can use this on wool if it's a really nice, fine wool consistency, or woven consistency. In the past, the traditional approach, when you were using this sort of application of fiber reactive dye, you always set up an environment so that the dyes could react properly and be stable. And what that involved on cellulose was pre-soaking the fabric in a solution of water and soda ash. So you'd pre-soak the fabric, and then you had to dry it out, and then you'd apply the paste, and then you would steam. That's the process. If it's a silk fiber or wool fiber protein, then the process would be to create a soak, a pre-soak, that would be water and vinegar, and pre-soak the fabric once again, dry it out before you apply any of the dye. The good news just happens to be something that we discovered with the help of the people at Jacquard. What we discovered, because I have one of their bullet steamers, is that there isn't any need to pre-soak the fabric. Soda ash turns brown if it's subjected to heat that's too high or steam that's too hot. And so what we've discovered by trial and error is that we can completely skip the pre-soaking stage with the soda ash and the water on cellulose fiber. Now, over here on the vinegar side, where we would have pre-soaked the silk or the wool in water and vinegar, we can put the vinegar in the steamer, in the water. We can mix it up there so that the vinegar is in the steam, so we have eliminated one of the hassles of the whole crazy thing, which is the pre-soak. So you may not believe it, but if you try it, you'll see. Now it's important, and we'll get over to the steamer, and I'll reiterate this again, that you keep the pot that you're using for steaming going full blast all the time, because one of the fails here is if you turn it down to medium, you don't get the full dose of steam that you need. But we'll talk about that again in a little bit. Now, if I have a very thin, sort of flimsy fabric, I may want to stabilize it using freezer paper, and that's what I've done with this silk broadcloth. I have a silk noil that I'm going to print on, and if this was a cotton broadcloth or it was a heavier cotton fabric, for example, or rayon, I wouldn't necessarily need to put the freezer paper on it, but I am going to put it on these thinner fabrics because it makes a surface that's more stable, so I get a better print. I cut the freezer paper the size of my fabric, which is what I've already done here, and then I use the iron. I iron on the paper side, and I'll just give it another shot. Whoa, really a shot. That scares me every time. So now I've got these two stable, and I'm going to flip this over to work on it. And as I said, this is perfect for stenciling. So what I have is a set of stencils. I'm so excited because Stencil Girl, the company online, has picked up a lot of my expanded squares, and they sent me a preview of the designs that are going to be available through Stencil Girl. So you can check those out, and we'll mention that when those are available in some other format. But anyway, I've got them, and I'm going to play with them today. So you can work with that, but you can work with other stencils you have. You can make your own stencils, obviously, and you can use my interfacing method, which is 2 pieces of interfacing with, in this case, tulle sandwiched in between. That's if we haven't done a video on that, maybe we'll do that one next. Anyway, you can use any stencil you like. I could cut freezer paper and iron it to the fabric and then apply the paste around it, if that's what I wanted to do. It's pretty versatile. And I don't really have to have a stencil. I could brush or mix the paste, the colors, right onto the fabric. And I could put I could put some of the paste down on the fabric and use a real stiff squeegee and squeegee it around. So a lot of improvisational ways to work with the paste. You're just seeing me use a fairly traditional approach, which is with the stencil. Now, this is key. The best possible brush for the paste is one of these, I think they call them chip brushes at Home Depot and Lowe's and those kind of big box stores. And they start looking like this, but this is too flimsy. So 50 cents, under $1 easily. The thing to do is to cut the bristles off, give it a haircut. Every time I trim one, I think of my mother and my bangs. I should really put a picture in this video so you could see. My hair looked about like that. Anyway, now that makes the perfect stiff surface because these pastes, we've used the word creamy, but in fact, they're a little bit on the hard side. They have to be, because if they're too soft and I put them on the fabric and I get too much of the paste, it'll bleed later in the steamer. So the newest formula may seem a little stiffer than what you've seen me use in the past, but there's a good reason for it because it allows me to have more control when I actually start doing the stenciling. Now, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how to mix colors because I could take this blue and this chartreuse, and I can use a palette knife, which is a very inexpensive tool. You don't have to have this particular tool. You could use a little butter knife. You could probably use a wooden, like those little sticks that they make, like a tongue depressor type stick. Anything like that would work. I just happen to have found the tool. And I also have here a piece of white plexiglass, and I'm going to use it as my palette to mix two colors together. So let me show you how I would do that. So I'm going to use this chartreuse and this basic blue, and I'm going to put it on the palette. See, it's kind of crumbly. It wouldn't necessarily be crumbly if I was just using that dry brush, but it's definitely crumbly when I put it on the palette. Now I'm realizing, don't do this. Whoa, don't do that. I should have another palette. This is my wax and this is my studio and I can mix that, but that's really bad form to get those colors mixed. Now, when I work with it here to blend the color, the more I mix it together with the palette knife, the softer it gets. And I'd say, wow, I love that color. Made it really nice, sort of olivey green. So now I can just work directly from this palette with my brush. But see, you don't really want to load up the brush with too much because that's when you're going to encounter, as I say, I get over here on the fabric and I'm using this pouncing motion. That's a traditional term, the up and down motion of stenciling. So you see, it may look very hard, but it needs to be hard in order to keep that clean line. And if I want to blend the color, I would not. It would be bad form to put this brush directly into that chartreuse. So I'm going to get another, I'm going to try and get rid of that I put in there. But see, I don't really need very much on the brush. Now, the color will shift after the fabric's been steamed. So one of the things that I recommend people do at the very beginning is do a test run. You know, get a piece of fabric, maybe a couple different kinds of fabric, and pounce a little bit of color onto the fabric that you're planning to use, and do a test strip. So do the yellow, orange, the red, all the colors that come in the kit or the set. Do samples of all of those on a white piece of fabric, and then just keep that so that you have an idea of what the colors are going to look like when after they're steamed. Now notice that looks, I'll just pull this corner up. it looks a little bit on the light side, and that's another place where there's a learning curve, because if I wanted it to be really solid, I could certainly stencil so that less of the background was showing through. It didn't look so pastel right now, but the more of the paste that I add to the fabric, the riskier it is that the design will bleed later. So I guess another way to say that might be cleaner than what I've tried to say is that after this steams, the color will spread out a little bit because the wax in the paste melts, and when it melts, then it fills in some of those places that look sort of pale. That looks pretty nice just now, just exactly the way it is. So this is pretty much what you want, and it's especially what you want if you've never done this before and you're just learning. So this is a ding. That'll show up later. There's no way to get rid of that. So if you don't, you have to be really careful when you're using a stencil that has such a narrow margin. If I pick out another one of these, let's try this one. You could go for a smaller brush too. You know, one of my standing beliefs is that there's a perfect tool, a perfect fabric, and a perfect product combination. I think of that as the most elegant combination. And I know for a fact how beautiful this fabric looks when it's been stenciled. See, that looks pretty light like right now, but we'll steam it and we'll see what it looks like after it's been steamed. If I bring in a new fabric, then I've introduced a new variable, and this fabric, being thinner than the other, not such a nubby weave, takes the paste a little bit differently. So a lot of it is really trial and error, and I think I've glopped right there by getting the wax under the paste under the stencil, so that may turn into an issue. But you know, one of the things about these products, not products as much as the process, one of the things that's true about this is that if it was absolutely perfect, you may as well just get it printed at, you may as well just buy printed fabric. One of the things we love about these effects is the hand-done quality of them, and sometimes that includes a little imperfection. Okay, I've added another design so that you can see the sort of detail that we're talking about, the combination of the paste with the stencils. And the next important thing to know is that this paste is water soluble, so it washes right off of the tools with a little soap and water. So you should always be cleaning up your stencils, no matter what kind you're using, unless they're a throwaway variety. And you can clean all the brushes with soap and water too. The color may not come out because these are natural bristles, so you could give them a really nice color job. But the dye and the paste does need to be rinsed out before you work with the paste another time, because it won't bond in there and stay there. It'll come back to haunt you if you don't give the brushes a good wash. So now I'm going to show you how to wrap this up and prepare it for the steamer. Okay, in order to steam the fabric, first, if I've put it on the freezer paper, I will take the freezer paper off. Now, you can use regular newspaper for this, or you can buy newsprint, which is very inexpensive. People ask me all the time about newspaper. It's not a problem. The ink on it won't come off. Papers are actually printed with soy-based inks now, and they won't transfer onto your fabric. At least I've never had that happen. So I want to cut the paper a little bit bigger than my fabric sample. I'm going to fold this end in. You're using the paper rather than just putting this directly into the steamer, because if unreacted dye gets against your fabric somewhere, it'll bleed off there. It'll transfer. So it's important to wrap it up in paper, and the newsprint's perfect. So just roll this into a little bundle like that, and then I'm going to use a piece of masking tape or blue painter's tape, or this is some sort of green painter's tape. Like that, just a little bundle. If I had a longer piece, I could fold it and it wouldn't be a problem. As a matter of fact, a lot of the time, even with littler pieces, so that they don't touch the side of the steamer. I might make a little bundle and just tape these two sides together. Oop. Like that. That keeps it from hitting the sides in the steamer. I can put in several pieces at the same time. So I'm going to wrap up this piece too. Doesn't take much paper. You could put a little safety straight pin through there if you want to instead of the tape, but the tape's pretty efficient. And you might not think that the steam is going to penetrate this paper, but it does. It's really pretty effective. When I do big pieces, I roll it up in paper and then I stand it upright inside a steamer. And if you go, I think there's another YouTube video of mine that shows you how to work with that kind of steamer, or it might be on my website. In any event, now we're ready to go over and put these in the steamer, which is preheating on the stove as we speak. Okay, steamer tutorial. This is one of my favorite basic steamers. It's called a Tamale Pot. Tamale Pot has a ridge down inside, and that ridge supports this platform. About like that. So what I can do is put the water in this pot below that platform, and then I just put my bundles down on top, and you see it's so big. I can fit several bundles in there. I can stack them up. I never want them to touch the side, because if the bundle gets wet, the dye will bleed. So the water can't bubble up above the platform, and the water can't be, the condensation on the side of the pot can't touch the bundle. But that's pretty straightforward and easy to avoid. There are workarounds. One thing you can do if you're not quite sure you've got enough clearance is to put a couple of tin cans down inside and stand those up and then put the platform on top of that instead of on that ridge down below. And that way you've got more clearance so that the water definitely won't touch the bundle. And if you have another pot, for instance the one that's here on the stove, I'm not actually going to use that, but I wanted to show it. I could adapt this system by getting a wire strainer like this and putting it in just like that, and then putting the bundles in there. Or I can get what's called a pizza screen. Pizza screens come in lots of different sizes. Ideally, you'll have a pizza screen that fits down inside your pot, because if you do, then you can use the tin can method and set it up just like that. Now, to be on the safe side, I'm going to transfer that water into this pot. Okay, so I've poured the water from this enamel pot into the tamale steamer, and then once I did that, I put those two tin cans down inside, and I put that pizza screen on top. Oh no, I didn't, sorry. I could have, but I used the Tamale Platform. So the Tamale Platform is right about here. You can't see in the pot, but it's right about there, and the water level's right about here, and that'll protect the bundles from getting wet. So I want to put the bundles down inside. And by the way, I added about a cup of white vinegar, 9% white vinegar, to the water in the pot. So now I've got the vinegar bath set up that I needed for my silk. If I was working with cotton or cellulose, I wouldn't put the vinegar in the pot. It doesn't have any effect at all on a cellulose fabric. So it's only the silk or wool that requires the vinegar. As far as the cotton would be concerned, the high steam, you can see how much it's steaming already. That high steam will set the crayon, no problem. Now, I don't want to just put the lid on top of the pot, because if I do, the condensation from the lid will drip down on the bundle, and then the bundles will get wet, and then the dye bleeds. That's the problem. So what I need is a towel. I'll put the towel over the pot, and then I'll put the lid on the pot, and then I'll time it for 30 minutes. And at the end of the 30 minutes, you'll see what's going to happen here. There will be a fast forward during the 30 minutes. Go find something fun to do, and then we'll take it out and you'll see how beautiful it is. Our 30 minutes has elapsed, and I'm about to take the little bundles out of my steamer, and I have a pair of dedicated tongs just for that. I could put on a hot pad or a hot mitt, and that would work too, but you want to be careful because the steam is hot. No water, that's a good sign, but look how they're steaming. Kind of amazing, isn't it? Kind of like a barbecue. Okay. So I open up the bundle. You can see a little bit of the dye comes off on the paper, but you see color's still pretty much, it's awful close to what it was. That's the good thing about the pastes as opposed to the crayons. With the soy wax crayons, the color really changes dramatically, but with the paste, a lot of the time what you see is what you get. Now this isn't finished, I'll have to rinse this out. I'll do that in a second. One of the beauties of using a slightly heavier fabric like this silk noil, which is a fabulous fabric and easy to sew, is the fact that it holds the paste in place, so it's not as, even if you overdid the paste application here, it wouldn't be very likely to bleed, whereas on a lighter fabric, the chance of it bleeding would be higher. But check it out. So you can see there, this one, that nice silk noil, very little chance that it would bleed on that fabric, but even on this lighter silk, the detail, it's actually really good. Even what I was worried about over here with a little bit of extra paste along that edge, because of my own application error or whatever, the color's good. So I'm going to rinse these out and we'll take another look at them when they're rinsed and iron dry. So I've washed these out and touched them up with the iron to dry them out, and there's virtually no change in the color at all. So with the proper steaming, you're going to be able to keep that gorgeous color, and you're also going to be able to keep the detail. So just to hit on the high points again before we close, remember that the paste is a little bit hard and you don't want to get too much on your brush because you'll lose your detail. So work with a very dry brush and cut that brush down the way I showed you. Stabilize the fabric if you need to stabilize the fabric, and use a deft touch when you're applying the paste. Steam for 30 minutes. If you have a bigger bundle, steam for a little bit longer. You can't oversteam it. You can't hurt it. And I did not say before, which is important to know, if the dye transfers onto the paper, probably better to throw the paper away because you don't want it to get on something you're working on later. Do remember that these pastes can be layered, so I could go back into this now, and remember, no pre-soaking, which is fantastic. I could go back into this piece now and add additional patterning on top of it. I could build up the patterning on this particular surface until I couldn't see any white space at all, and it would be incredible. But that's another workshop and another day. Have some fun and play with them.